If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
It looked harmless enough. Just a professional model's album of poses. Yet this was the glamorous Pitfall, where there lurked the most seductive forces of evil. Violent jealousy.
Johnny, I like that girl.
I don't care what you like or what you don't like. The torments of unfaithfulness.
I met her a couple of months ago while I was on a case.
What about this girl?
Somebody told him a lot of things about her and me.
Are they true?
Yes.
Venomous hate. The raging fury of a guilty conscience.
You better call the police. I just killed a man.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Ian Brownell.
Hello, friend.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Philip Marinello.
What do you say we hang up this call and take a drive to South America?
We are kicking off Noirvember 2024 with a look at André De Toth's Pitfall. Released in 1948, the film stars Dick Powell as John Forbes, an insurance man who is leading a life of quiet desperation. He's tired of getting dropped off at work by his wife, Jane Wyatt, as Sue Forbes, and being humiliated by his son. When he gets onto the case of Bill Smiley, who embezzled some dough to impress a dame, he sees a chance to have an adventure. We'll be talking about that dame, Mona Stevens, played by Lizabeth Scott, and the heavy who menaces them, J.B. McDonald, played by Raymond Burr, as well as spoiling the movie as we go along. So if you don't want anything ruined, go track down that movie right now. It's even available over on archive.org as a colorized version, which should be taken out and shot. So, Ian, when was the first time you saw Pitfall, and what did you think, sir?
I love film noir, and I've been watching film noir double features for the last 4 decades at the Brattle Theater in Cambridge, Mass., which is the cinema where I do my regular podcast. And they've been running week-long, month-long, summer-long noir programs for longer than I've been alive, often in conjunction with Eddie Muller, Foster Brooks, and other noir writers or members of the Film Noir Foundation. But the thing about film noir is that they share a lot of similar themes and plots and actors, and they tend to have interchangeable titles, unless we're talking about, The Maltese Falcon or Double Indemnity. So often when I settle in to watch what I think is going to be a film I've never seen before based on the title and the cast and maybe like a one-sentence synopsis in the Brattle calendar, I often find myself realizing, oh, I've seen this movie before. Maybe in the back end of a double bill like 15 years ago, though frequently that doesn't really happen until like 20 or 30 minutes into the picture. This was the opposite of that scenario. I settled in to give this movie another look. And a little way in, I realized I had never seen this movie before. I was confusing it with another 1948 noir with Raymond Burr as a sadistic heavy Anthony Mann's Raw Deal. So this ended up being a first-time watch for me. I ran it a few months ago off the just crappy SD copy that's streaming on Amazon Prime. And then I watched it a second time off the restored Kino Blu-ray. But I love the film. I love how straightforward and almost ordinary it is. There are not a lot of convoluted twists and turns, and even the dialogue is very matter-of-fact. It's not the kind of coded, double entendre-laden dialogue that we think of when we think of film noir, which is one of the things we love about film noir, obviously. But this is a refreshingly mature and direct movie about fairly ordinary folks who just make a couple of bad decisions and then try to deal with them.
And Philip, how about yourself?
This has been on my radar for a while. I've seen some people talk about it. It's on my list of Kino Blu-rays to pick up on sales eventually. But yeah, this was also one for me that I had not watched before. I was familiar with a lot of the people involved, but yeah, earlier this week was my first watch, and then I watched it again today. And I exactly on the same page as Ian. My first Letterboxd one sentence review was just how powerful this was in its simplicity. Like, I love all of the noir tropes. I've been watching noir for quite a long time as well. And noir was kind of like my gateway to being like the next level of my cinema journey. And I think one of like, I've done Noirvember before, but I think I've done a few noirs, just one off with you here and there. And it's something that is always very captivating. But something like this is just as exciting because it does the things that film noir does so well, while also, whether it's intentional or not, subverting a lot of the things that you expect. And it felt so refreshing.
So I came to this one through Quentin Tarantino, of all people.
Your favorite filmmaker,
yeah.
Right, Mike?
Well, he's a really good gateway drug, of course. So I had the script for Reservoir Dogs, and on the first page of the script, he thanks a whole bunch of people. He thanks Jean-Luc Godard, he thanks Timothy Carey, Lionel White, and André De Toth, and I don't remember who all else. Probably, I think he thanks Chow Yun-fat, not Rango Lam. Yeah. Right. But with André De Toth, I was not that familiar with his work, and this is still early 90s. So I don't know if you guys remember that big book at the video store where it was like the catalog that you would have and you could look up different actors. This might be way before your guys' time. I don't know. But I looked up André De Toth and I was just like, okay. And I wrote down all of the movies that he had directed. I went up to Toronto and was at Sam the Record Man, and they had just an amazing selection of VHS tapes. Again, dating myself. And I found Pitfall, and I was just so excited. I found Pitfall, and then I found Fingerman, and Fingerman had Timothy Carey in it. It was pretty tough to find at the time. I don't know if that's been restored. Hopefully it has. And then this one with having Dick Powell in it, but directed by André De Toth. And I said, okay, let's check it out. And I fell in love with it. So that was 94, 95, something like that is when I saw this for the first time, and just really, really liked this movie. And I'm so glad that we're able to talk about it because it feels there's a lot of noir tropes, like you guys said, but at the same time, there are some twists and turns in here where I just really didn't expect it. Like, we have to talk about the femme fatale and just how different Lizabeth Scott is as a femme fatale versus, you know, your Phyllis Dietrichs or any of these other like sex pot. I need a man to manipulate and get him to do my bidding. It doesn't feel like she really is looking for that. It doesn't feel like she's a Spider Woman hanging out in a web just waiting for a fly to come in.
No, not at all. I was going to say, like, not to get too film bro-y, but I was going to say, like, is she even a femme fatale? Like, how are we defining that, and does she even qualify?
Well, I think she qualifies. I know femme fatale has become shorthand for an evil, manipulative woman, but I think the pure definition of the term is more a woman who causes the downfall of a weak man. It doesn't necessarily have to be because she's duplicitous or out for her own gain. She can just be beautiful or vulnerable or in a tight spot, and the male protagonist ends up making choices that he knows he shouldn't make, but he can't help himself because he's smitten with this irresistible, quote unquote, fatal woman. But, you know, she doesn't have to be fatal in the sense of evil. And I don't think John Forbes is an especially weak man, but he is bored. He feels trapped in his domestic life. He knows he should leave Mona alone, and he gets several warnings to leave her alone. Which I think is part of what makes her qualify as a femme fatale, because like he knows what he's doing. He knows he shouldn't be cheating on his wife. He knows Raymond Burr has the hots for this woman and kind of wants to do anything, including possibly kill him, but at least beat him up to keep him away from her. So, you know, he pursues her anyway, and he comes to regret it, but it's no fault of her own. But it still makes her a femme fatale, I think.
Well, it's so fascinating because typically, like, I think of, like the double indemnities or the postman always rings twice, things like that. When Mona finds out that John is married, she's taken aback. Like she's not going for him. Like the progression of their relationship throughout this movie, especially the second time I watched it, just like Ian said, like this is just like, this has a lot more realism to it. It's a really well told story. Like all the pieces and the dominoes, how they all fall is just like done very well, but it's not like you can feel the strings. Like this is very much a story, but it doesn't feel contrived and super heightened like a lot of noir does that we all love. It feels like, oh yeah, like that could genuinely happen without too much imagination. Like a guy not wearing a wedding ring, doesn't talk about his wife, makes very small compromises, and then gets himself into some awful situations.
Well, he does wear a wedding ring, but he wears it on the wrong finger, on his pinky. And
I couldn't tell if that was that, or if that was like,
I did not see that on the Amazon SD version. I had to wait till I saw it, the Blu-ray, to get that detail. But yeah,
I didn't know if that was like a symbol of like, oh, he's a successful insurance man. I could not tell what that was.
I kind of wonder if he gained some weight after he got married and maybe had to switch it over. But he's doing that even before he meets Mona, like in the car with Jane Wyatt. And that's the thing, like him being in that very weak position of being driven to work by his wife. You know, that feels very emasculating to me in that. And then he gives her that little speech before he leaves where it's just like,
I leave the office at exactly 4 minutes after 5. Takes 6 minutes to walk to the corner where Charlie picks me up at exactly 5:15. Takes 32 minutes to drive home unless we hit a couple of stop signals. I'm kissing you on the cheek at exactly 5:50.
Old man routine getting you down again?
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes I get to feel like a wheel within a wheel within a wheel.
You and 50 million others.
I don't want to be like 50 million others.
Oh, but you're John Forbes. Average American. Backbone of the country.
I don't want to be an average American, backbone of the country. I want somebody else to be the backbone and hold me up.
You've been reading Tommy's geography book again. Glamorous Borneo, rubber plantations, and dusky dames.
Well, it sounds a lot better than glamorous Olympic Mutual Insurance Company. Inc.
Speaking of which, we're here.
Oh. Well, see you at exactly 5:50.
Gives her that peck on the cheek, and she's just like, hey.
Wait a minute. I'm getting a little bored of that kiss on the cheek, too. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And then his kid, that whole thing with his kid where it's like, oh yeah, so-and-so's father was in the war and he won this and that. He got the Silver Star and this and that. And he's like, what'd you get, Daddy? He's like, you know, like basically like a...
Well, your father got the Good Conduct Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters.
Really? Wait until I tell Jimmy. His father only got the Silver Star.
Well, son, I don't think I'd do that if I were you. Might sound like boasting.
Fam, hold it, man. You told me you served in Nam.
I did. Saigon. Well, how'd you lose your eye?
fucking around in the office. We were shooting paper clips at each other, and one of the damn fools hit me in the eye.
You don't say to me.
Well,
How'd you win those fucking medals on your coat?
Well, this one is for typing, and this one is for dart champion, and this one is for surfing, and this
I got that one. Never mind. Shut up.
It might sound like bragging that you got the Medal of Conduct. He only got the Silver Star. Jane Wyatt has this amazing line where she's like, he kept the Japs out of Baltimore or something, like just that's totally, condescending. As you said, like so many of the lines of this are very emasculating, but in such a funny way. It's not heavy-handed. It feels very organic. Like the rest of the movie, it feels very natural. The dialogue feels natural. I love Jane Wyatt in this movie because she's not some nagging, weak, or clueless wife. In the book that this is based on, she's dealing with like a complicated pregnancy and she can't really get out of bed. So she's kind of helpless, which makes Forbes like more of a jerk in the book, but it also makes her less of a formidable presence in his life. In the movie, she's funny and sassy and sexy. She meets his like gloom and doom and his cynicism with really good humor.
Their rapport is great. Like he's not in an unhappy marriage. He's just kind of in like a midlife crisis. Like when he's kind of reminiscing back, talking about their high school days, he's like, you were voted prettiest and I was voted most likely to succeed. What happened? She said, well, I had a baby. What happened to you? Like she was just like gently ribbing him. It wasn't like a put down. She's like, hey, like, get over yourself. Like, let's turn the life we have into the one we want. Like,
and she's someone who can deal with honesty in a marriage, which is another thing we don't often see in noir pictures. She's like, she's like a kind of an ideal. I mean, obviously she was the wife on Father Knows Best. So in many ways, she was an idealized American wife later in her career. But like, this is one of those movies where I often find myself like, there's a lot of movies that are either, whether it's, a film noir or a movie like Damage, where I'm just like, I can't identify with the protagonist because I'm in love with his wife so much. I'm like, that's the actress I'm more attracted to. That's the character I'm more attracted to. But I still, like, in noir movies, I still find it compelling. Like, you do identify with Forbes because he does seem like just such an ordinary schmo.
I love the part in the book where Mac, and we'll talk about the differences a little bit more, but Mac says to him, how's your wife? And then he goes, fine, I said without thinking. Then I thought, all right, I thought plenty. Sue almost had a miscarriage. She was still taking those Pramone tablets and opium. She's been in bed for over 3 months, not allowed to move at all. I get the connection. He nodded. I thought you'd be interested. I'm like, oh, so you can't have sex with your wife, so you just want a little strange then, buddy.
Those are both very interesting dynamics. And for the movie, I kind of like the changes that were made. Again, like, because the way they take all those things that we're used to, it's kind of like those punches land much stronger and you kind of don't see them coming. And I know I don't want to jump to the end, but I mean, just the way everything falls and then the climax of this movie at first, like the very first time I watched it, I mean, I was like, what? Like, what is going on? But then you kind of think back and you look at everything that went there. You're like, wow, that was really subversive and really honest and really genuine and sensational in a way that life is sensational.
Yeah, the first time I watched it, I thought like the ending, I was like, oh, this is like the tacked on Hollywood ending. And then like the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, actually not at all. Like this is actually the perfect ending. And it's really an atypical ending because it is so direct, like because of what she is talking about in terms of reconciling their relationship. You don't see scenes like that at the end of most Hollywood movies.
No,
this
it's in 1948. Like it's brutal. It's hopeful. It's kind of beautiful. It's very like, like if you've been in a marriage and you've had those conversations at all, like it felt so real in a way that, yeah, 1940s Hollywood movies were not at all.
Yeah. Like it's not the Fatal Attraction ending where it's like, okay, like problem solved, family reunited, everybody's good. It's like, problem solved. Like he's not going to jail. Yeah, he's still alive. He's still married. He ain't dead. But, as she says, like, I don't know if it's ever going to be the same.
Usually noir is like jail or dead.
Well, and poor Lizabeth Scott is off to jail, and she doesn't get that closure with him at all. Like, they miss each other by seconds. He sees her going off. He could call to her, but he doesn't. He just leaves. And this poor lady is getting carted off to jail. He's as guilty as she is. He killed a man in cold blood. She did the same, but in order to protect herself from this total creep, Raymond Burr plays a wonderful creep in this movie. He's just amazing. From the first moment where he looks kind of little because he's sitting down.
He was fantastic.
Yeah. Oh my God. His shoulders look like they're going to go off the sides of the screen, and he's got this tiny little head.
But he's in that cartoonishly big suit.
He's always like that in movies of this period. He's a really fast, I mean, as a fat guy myself, I love big actors who photograph well. Brian Dennehy is kind of like a personal hero. And I love how imposing Raymond Burr is. Like, he's almost as big as Sidney Greenstreet, but he doesn't have that big head, and he's not an old man like Greenstreet is. He's very big, but in a sexy way. And those giant suits are kind of part of it. Like, he's like swimming around in all this fabric, but it doesn't weigh him down. It almost makes him buoyant. I have an older friend who just loves Perry Mason, the old black and white version, and she's watched like every single episode, like the way Star Trek fans watch like Star Trek episodes. And I watched a few of them with her, and he's really huge in that show too. Like, but he's like young, he's running around, he's like bending down on the floor to like check out a body, and then he gets up and he's like running to the door, and he's just so big. And I'm just still not used to seeing that in any film or TV show, really of any era, to have like the dramatic lead, the handsome dramatic lead, be so incredibly obese. He's not just overweight, he's an obese man. And obviously that's used wonderfully in movies like Rear Window and stuff like that. But I just find him kind of fascinating in this era, and especially in this movie.
We should talk about the book real quick, because in the book, he's a cop, and his plan is, hey, I sent this guy Smiley and his partner. They were purse snatchers, I think it is. And I sent them up the river, but Smiley's got this really hot wife, and I really want to get with her. This is where the logic gap comes in. He somehow wants Forbes, who is a screenwriter in the book, which would have...
Yeah, he's a Hollywood screenwriter.
Would have kind of put it into a little bit of a lonely place type of area, though he's not a psychotic. It's Mac, the cop in this one, who's psychotic. And so he sends Forbes off because he knows Forbes' wife is on bed rest and wants Forbes to, get it wet. And then I guess he wants Forbes to dump Mona so he can sweep in. The logic there is really...
Well, he wants Forbes to break her in, like to dispel any loyalty she might have to her incarcerated husband. If he kind of like if she crosses that line and maybe feels regretful, but now she's already done it once. So what the hell? What's the second time? So he can swoop in and really, he can do the big seduction after the sort of failed guilty seduction. And Forbes like reluctantly agrees, but he falls for her. And they start this affair, and that's, McDonald sees that as a big double cross, because they're buddies in the book. Like he gives him like real, like true crime facts from his cases that the Forbes
like
can
story
use
ideas.
in his screenplays. Exactly.
Well, then De Toth and Bowers did such man, all of that is fixed perfectly for a movie. That sounds like an interesting book, but man, those are some bold, very smart changes.
It was very interesting and very well written, in my opinion, anyway. Especially there's some scenes where Forbes is losing it, and he's still trying to work, still trying to get the screenplay done. He's got the most understanding boss in the world who really cares about him. It's kind of like Keys from Double Indemnity. And then he's there popping bennies like crazy in order to try to get through work. He can't get Mona off of his mind. He's worried about Mac. He's got all of this stuff. And the writing is such that you just feel that speed that is going through his veins, and just the confusion that he has. He almost has a psychotic break from taking too many Benzedrines.
I'll add that to my list. I don't read a ton of noir pulpy stuff, but I would like to at some point. I'll throw that on the list.
I read a lot of noir when I was in my 20s. That was when I first really discovered the film genre, and that led me to wanting to read Chandler and Hammett and all the sort of classic noirs. I had never read anything by this author, Dratler. Is that his name? Jay Dratler. He was also not a prolific screenwriter, but he wrote a bunch of films, including Laura, the quintessential Otto Preminger, film from 1944. He also wrote Call Northside 777, which was made only 4 years later in this same year, 48. But it's an early example of like a shift in crime stories that I noticed when I was writing a piece for my blog about 1947. The post-war era, the film noir era, is all about criminals and private eyes and people who work outside the law and look down at law enforcement as dysfunctional and not like fully rebuilt after the war. And everything's still all upside down. And there's all these forgotten men and women who are like being forced back into the kitchen after like being in the workforce. And the 1950s, we see this big shift from cynicism to optimism that trades poetically cryptic detective narratives for clearly drawn police procedurals and all that, not all that, but a lot of the shadowy expressionistic style of film noir is in some cases replaced by the pseudo-documentary realism of location shooting in real cities like all the new waves in Europe were. And police procedurals become really popular in film, but especially on TV where, the wheels of justice always seem to work out. And Call Northside 777 is one of these many like ripped from the headlines docudrama style crime tales like The Naked City and He Walked by Night. And I think it's a really good movie with Jimmy Stewart as like a crusading journalist who's trying to right the wrongs of 10 years earlier and spoiler alert, succeeds.
The idea of making Mac a private eye, and it feels like he was a cop, and it feels like something probably happened, and that's why he's not on the force anymore. But he has ties to the force, so he's quasi-legal. Like he's in that position where he can manipulate the system still, but yet manipulate everything.
Yeah, he gets information. He's privileged. He has access to Smiley to manipulate him later on. He's positioned himself very well. And you're kind of like, man, this guy is such a brute and an idiot. Like, how is he getting by? And it's because of the systems that he's manipulating.
Yeah, and he holds that over both of the other characters. Like he basically lords his connection, and he's like, I know how the police work way better than you two do. You have no alibi, you have no credibility in terms of what you're accusing me of, and that's he just has them both.
Mac is like a big brute idiot, yet he like Smiley, John, and Mona, like all of them. He's like, I'm in charge. And that's such an interesting dynamic. Like you don't really see that very often as well.
Oh yeah. He's so smart when it comes to riling Smiley up. I mean, the way that Smiley's like, yeah, this guy got me drunk and gave me a gun. I'm like, yeah, he's just setting you up, man. Like setting Smiley up. He's setting up Smiley. He's setting up Forbes, and this is all just to get Mona all to himself. And for a while he succeeds.
Is that not setting off any alarm bells for you, guy?
What do you guys think of Lizabeth Scott, and what do you think of Mona?
I mean, I was never a big fan of Lizabeth Scott, and after listening to Eddie Muller's commentary on the Kino Blu-ray, I can see I'm not alone. But she's a very unique screen presence. She always reminded me of Jenna Rollins, not because of her acting. Obviously, she's nowhere near the great actress that Jenna Rollins is, but she's got that deep voice. The cadence of her speech is similar. And her face, she has a similarly wide mouth, and her eyes they seem kind of farther apart than a normal human being, which gives her a kind of unsettling look, even though she's obviously quite striking. But I think she's great in the movie. Like, and as Eddie Muller talks about in that commentary, like she was cast because André De Toth thought of her as an ordinary woman as opposed to a gorgeous Hollywood starlet, which, technically she was a gorgeous Hollywood starlet. But she doesn't look like a knockout instantly, even in the glamour photos that are his like first introduction to her when he's like looking through her portfolio there. Like she still doesn't look like a great femme fatale that you're gonna like you're gonna risk your marriage for.
No, it's not the postman always rings twice.
Yeah.
Where
She
he's
doesn't
like,
come down the
and
stairs.
I'm gonna throw it all away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
You could just see it floating away. Yeah, exactly.
She's got to learn how to lock her door, though, because he just walks right in, and a lot of people just walk right into her apartment. It's like, come on, lady, lock that freaking door. Because, yeah, he walks in, sees her portfolio because she's a kind of a fashion model, and that whole weird thing. Like, we've seen that in movies before. I particularly remember Vertigo, where it's that in, what was that, the one with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. I think that all of the main female characters in there were models at a department store where it's like, oh, I want to see that dress on this woman. I want to see that. And I'm just like, what is this weird thing where just men how many
it's in so many movies.
How many perverts were taking advantage of that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and the way that Raymond Burr is threatening to her, like, oh, you don't want to show me the dress? He says very loudly so her supervisor hears, and it's just like, no, customer's always right. I don't want to get fucking fired.
Yeah, he's like, I got the money. Yeah. No, those scenes are in so many movies. How to Marry a Millionaire. Like, there's all these movies and movies in the 30s, too, with like, I'm trying to think, there's a really good one with Rosalind Russell, is it? Or maybe it's, I can't remember. But like, this was just a profession. Like, if you were a model, it didn't necessarily mean you were like going to a photographer studio every day. You were going to a department store and showcasing these outfits, like, like a private fashion show for really just ordinary customers, not for like super wealthy New York elites, but just like regular folks.
They didn't have the internet. They couldn't be like, here's our archive of photos. They're like, here's our people.
Or a Snapchat filter to see how I look in this particular outfit.
They didn't even have glossy color magazines that you could get in the mail. Yeah, you just had to go down.
Well, yeah, it's such I want to get back to Mona, but yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon. You said, Mike, like, it is you can see so clearly how that can be abused and misused and how kind of skeevy it is. And this isn't even modern, the only semi-modern thing I can think, even in that world, is Will Smith in Enemy of the State. And that's like very seedy. And that was the whole point of it. And it's like, yeah, like, obviously this type of system is kind of built for abuse in ways because, again, money is power. Like, a lot of the most powerful noir made in the US is about the systems that run people over. I mean, we talked about that a ton in our Naked Kiss episode. And I just saw that over and over here, especially on my second viewing, just the way Mona, with all three of the male relationships in this movie, whether she wants to have them or not, just the way that she deals with unwanted behavior, unwanted attention. With Smiley, the whole reason that any of this happens in the movie is that Smiley is so in love with her. Whatever his financial or economic predicaments are, he didn't feel as a man in America that they were good enough. So he goes to robbery, he goes to embezzlement in order to, quote unquote, provide what he feels like. She's like, yeah, I don't want this stuff, like the fur coats and the diamonds. She likes the boat, but she's not asking, hey, like, turn to crime, so that she's like, you're nice to me and I like that. But he feels that way. So she has to deal with the ramifications of this unwanted actions from him. Obviously, all of McDonald's stuff from her is unwanted. But the first time John goes, he literally just walks in her house, and she is either so used to that kind of behavior, or she's so like good at her defenses, because it's like, there's a strange man in my house. Like, I'm going to walk in and offer him a beer rather than be like confrontational to him.
I love what Mueller says on that commentary track, where it's like a noir film has already happened. It's like Smiley was the star of his own noir and it goes away to jail. And this almost becomes like chapter 2. This is almost the sequel to Smiley's story, which I'm like, yeah. And really, there could be a third part to this because, yeah, the way that this ends so ambiguously, where it's like, well, she's in jail now, and now he's back with his wife, and things are not very good here. Things are going to be very rocky for John going forward in his entire life.
And then there's the prequel, the McDonald story, about how he got fired from the police force and became a private detective, quote unquote.
That's a pulp novel I'd read.
Oh yeah, he's probably one of these guys where he's just like, okay, you can shoot 6 people without getting fired from the police, and he grows to like it so much, that once it gets to 7, then he wanted 8, then he wanted 9, and he just got very hungry for that death. He's so fascinating. That's what I like about this movie, is it feels like all of these characters live their own lives and are very well formed. It doesn't feel like we're just watching cardboard cutouts walk around.
To the femme fatale question, I think Mona's first interaction with John, when she finds him in there and he's looking at her photos, that's just so unique, because she kind of clocks him as like a regular guy, and she's not quite trying to slam him, but she just reads him really well. It's like, you're kind of like a boring guy who goes by the rules. And then she gets like a little saucy. She's like, "What? I bet you're probably going to be with your boys later on having beers, being like, oh, I met this babe, but I kept it all business." Like, that's probably projecting a lot of former traumatic noir stories that have happened in the past to her onto him. Like, he's not exactly that guy. He's going to go home to his wife and have the same boring routine. But like that, I feel like is maybe kind of the first seed of some of that. And then she kind of dumps out her whole story, and she kind of asks him for empathy, because she presents him, I know you're all business, but think about my life. I'm just a girl trying to get on in the world, and the engagement ring I receive from the guy the universe brought me was a stolen one, and that's just my lot in life. Can you give me like a little bit of care and concern here and not just treat me all business? Like, she's not seducing him. She's not coming on to him. And she's not belittling him. She's really kind of reaching out for a human connection, because her life as a model, who knows what that's like, and her fella's in prison, and she's just trying to reach out for a connection. And I felt like that was innocent and unique. And again, I don't know if I've ever seen that.
She gives him a great line, where she just says, I mean, not a line, it's the truth. She just says,
who hates
most
his
men
job?
aren't very nice to me, and so she actually sees him as a nice guy, which is not the way we as an audience are perceiving him. Like, we're perceiving him not as a bad guy, but as, not a great guy. He's like an insurance guy who's like, collecting. Yeah. And he's collecting like the stolen, the embezzled goods from like the poor, would-be wife of the guy who was put away. And it's like, it's a seedy job. It's not pleasant. He doesn't carry it out in a particularly nice way, but to her, because she's used to mostly shitty guys, she's like, you're a nice guy. And she even says it to him, and he's like, me? I'm nice? Like, he doesn't realize when she says, I meet a nice guy and, he does something nice for me. It takes him a second to realize she's talking about him.
Yeah, Mona's bar is very low.
Very low.
And that's tragic.
Right.
Dick Powell is just always so good as these noir protagonists. I love the story of De Toth hiring him because he knew that Powell was a schmuck, as he put it, because Powell was going through something very similar in his life, where he had kind of blown up his life by having an affair. And he's just like, yeah, he'd be perfect for this, because Powell can play kind of a sad sack, put upon guy. He can be very, very charming, which, you have to be that if you're going to go after Mona Smiley here. But yeah, it's just, he plays that role so well. And especially those scenes where he's just like, what are we going to do tonight? We're going to play bridge? Yeah, we play bridge every single week. Talking with his coworker, or maybe that's his boss in the insurance agency. He's just like, can we not do that for once? Even his son is like, I'm so sick of this town. It's like, wow, is that coming straight from your dad? Or is just like, are you going to be another little John Forbes when you grow up and be like, I'm bored of this, and you always drive me to work, and we always kiss on the cheek, and we always have the same pot roast on Wednesday or whatever. It's just like, he's so sick of the routine, and he just sees this opportunity. But yeah, to hear his kid go, when are we going to take a vacation? I'm sick of this town. I'm like, okay, all right, 5-year-old.
Yeah, I always, when I was younger, I confused Dick Powell with William Powell, because they're both, film noir people and comedians, or people who starred in comedy movies. And so like when I first saw Murder, My Sweet, I was expecting to see William Powell as Philip Marlowe. And I was like, this ain't William Powell? Like, who is this sort of unattractive fellow here? And it wasn't until I started to watch all the Warner Brothers backstage musicals with William Powell and Ruby Keeler and Joan Blondell. I love that genre almost as much as I love film noir. Like Gold Diggers of 1933 is one of my 100 favorite movies. Just love that movie. But I can see why Powell wanted to shed his like song and dance man, nice guy, gee whiz, aw shucks, juvenile persona. And I know he lobbied really hard to play the lead in Double Indemnity. And obviously he lost to Fred McMurray, who was also a nice guy or, played a lot of nice guys. But, after he got to do Murder My Sweet, he did all these film noirs and it really changed his career. And there aren't a lot of these careers where you have, because he was never a child actor. He's not like Mickey Rooney or anything, but he was, what they used to call a juvenile. Like he was young and he was a hoofer and he played, I don't think he really played the piano, but he played a lot of characters who played the piano. In middle age, I mean, he's not a particularly attractive guy when he's young, but in middle age, he's not conventionally handsome. And in Murder My Sweet, there's a scene where he's topless for quite a bit. And it's almost shocking to watch it with contemporary eyes. You realize why most leading men of this era did not take their shirts off unless they were Burt Lancaster or Kirk Douglas. So he really, every time I've seen him, it always strikes me that like this guy really should be playing exactly the kind of character that he's playing in this movie, like an insurance salesman, an ordinary guy who's got, a pretty good life. He's got a kid that loves him. He's got a wife that loves him, but it's the grind. It's the daily grind that he can't stand. And all of us have been in that position one time or another. And it's just, he makes the film noir choice, which lots of people make, but he's got to pay for it. And unfortunately, the person who really pays for it is Lizabeth Scott's character.
I really like Lizabeth Scott. I know not everybody does. She's kind of an acquired taste for some people. Kind of reminds me of, is it Cara Delevingne, the one who was the Enchantress in Suicide Squad? I think it's the dark eyebrows with the lighter. I think if they did a Lizabeth Scott story, she'd be really good at that. But I love the husky voice and all that. And I just find her so genuine in this movie and so nice compared to some of the other roles that she's played, because she can play femme fatale pretty darn well. I'm trying to remember if was she in Dead Reckoning, I think?
Yeah, she's in Dead Reckoning. She's in The Strange Love of Martha Ives, speaking of, or Ivers, with Kirk Douglas. I think that's Kirk Douglas's first movie, I think. And, I think she's good in those movies. Well, I don't love her in Dead Reckoning, but yeah, like I don't think she's bad. I don't think she's a bad actress. She's just not one of those like whenever her name would come up in credits, back when I was watching all those film noirs for the first time, I was never like excited the way, like if Barbara Stanwyck's name came up, you were like, ooh, Barbara Stanwyck, so I think it's just that. And, the more I've learned about her, the more I'm like, oh, I guess that was kind of her reputation. But as Eddie Muller points out in his commentary, this is a really good performance and it's a great script. She gets to say all this dialogue that tons of characters in movies like this would love to say, but never get the opportunity.
I can't remember if it was Muller or if it was somewhere else that I read that, was it Burt Lancaster and Barbara Stanwyck refused to work with her because they thought she was so untalented?
I think both of those people felt that way.
I thought she did very well in this one.
I've not seen much of her work, but she was a knockout in this. And again, she played the simplicity so well. And I feel like that takes a lot of talent because you're not just, stars can carry big moments, but to make like an everyday kind of character real, like that's talent.
Oh, the other moment when I talk about his son humiliating him after Raymond Burr shows up and just beats the shit out of him. And I love that low angle shot up of Raymond Burr and he's just pounding on, what's supposed to be Dick Powell. You just see him fighting over and over again. And then it's like, oh, gee, my dad says it was two of them because that's how many people it would take to, if it was just one, my dad could have beat him. And I'm like, Yeah, it was just one guy. I mean, it is surprising when he comes back later and manages to beat up Mac.
He gets his in. Like, sometimes those skinny guys, man, you got to watch out for them. But yeah, when he gets Mac by surprise, he gets his in pretty good. That was chilling. And clearly an ex-dirty cop.
It's bold to go after someone who's 3 times your size in weight class.
And that threat of, if you mess with my family, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, and it just Raymond Burr's character is so narcissistic in the movie. Like he even like, as you said, Lizabeth Scott tells him off. She's like, she tries to tell him nicely that she's not interested. And when he doesn't take no for an answer, she's like, all right, I'll just make it plain for you. I have no interest in you. I want you to leave me alone. And he's just like, but what about what I want? And then like, when he goes to confront Dick Powell the first time, he like goes to his house. He waits for his car to drive up. And then he's just like, hey, I told you I wanted that girl. Stay away from that girl. Like, it is really, really creepy. Yeah. And then he just like, when he's like, leave me alone, he's just like, boom, 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 just like punches him about 7 times. Like, really, yeah, just kicks the shit out of him.
In front of his own house. No, he's a sociopath. Yeah, he didn't catch him in an alley. That's in a suburb.
It's again, even in a film noir, it's a little shocking to see a character like that. And he doesn't see anything wrong. Like, that's the thing that's so creepy about him. He's like, I told you I wanted that girl. Like, so lay off for at least 3 weeks. I mean, it's really harsh. It's really harsh. It's where she works. It's like the department store.
There's some interesting process shots in this movie. There's one where she's, I think, trying to call him. It looks like she's at a store, and it's just her and another actress, and then behind it, it's all rear projection. There's one process shot that I absolutely love. It is when Forbes is on the ropes towards the end of the movie. It's about, I don't know, an hour and 20 minutes in or so. And he's completely dejected, and he's just wandering down the street. And it is so Dick Powell on a soundstage wandering. And then I don't know if it's rear projection at that point or if they put this in later. I imagine it's rear projection. It's just him walking past all of these storefronts. And what's great is that you see the reflections of all the stores on the other side of the street, but you don't see his reflection. It's like he's so taken out of the world that you don't see his reflection in those storefronts. And you so should, because of the way that it's being lit. You should really see his reflection.
That was a really strong scene. That gave me very strong Eyes Wide Shut vibes. I was like, oh, I wonder if this was in the back of Kubrick's mind at all. He's an insurance man.
Yeah. And you even get the brown derby being reflected in the mirror or in the windows and stuff. I'm like, that's really nice. Very, very Hollywood here.
Maybe he's a vampire. No, just kidding. If you want to see Lizabeth Scott in color, the year before this, she made not a very good movie, and she's not particularly good in it, but it's kind of a crazy movie called Desert Fury, which is a 3-strip Technicolor. It's not really a Western, but it's definitely worth seeing. And most of her films are black and white, but that's one where it's like full Technicolor.
Interesting. Streaming on the Criterion Channel with over a 3-star average. Why not?
Oh, good. Yeah, check it out. Yeah, I saw it on 35mm just a couple years ago. Yeah.
I need to check out Dead Reckoning. That I'm going to bump up on my list.
Yeah, I actually saw that at where the Nitrate Film Fest is held
at the Eastman
House. Yeah. I was very fortunate to be able to see that there. I was really excited to be able to see, any Humphrey Bogart on the big screen. I'm excited to see.
Speaking of 3D, but you were talking about your first introduction to André De Toth earlier. Like, my first introduction, aside from the fact that, he made House of Wax and he's a famously cycloptic director. He only has one eye, and that's one of the most famous early 3D movies. But my first introduction to him was in Martin Scorsese's film, personal journey through film history, where he is one of like 7 directors who are interviewed in that movie with an eye patch, and they're all just old and grizzled, and they're all like missing an eye. And you're just like, what happened to all these men? Like, but these guys didn't fight in the war. Well, John Ford did, but yeah. Fritz Lang, yep, and Nicholas Ray. Yeah, I mean, it literally is like 6 or 7 eye patches. Everybody. We saw that at the Harvard Film Archive, and everybody came out wanting to like wear an eye patch.
If you ever have a big screening of that, yeah, they should give out eye patches for the favors. I mean, I think the setup of the, I guess, climax of the action and then the fallout. We've talked about the fallout a little bit, but again, I thought it was both simultaneously really great storytelling and almost kind of just procedurally believable. Like it is sensational that Mac would basically pick up Smiley, spring him from jail, booze him up, give him a gun. Like that's a very noir premise. But then if you boil that down, it's okay, this is a guy, this is a jealous lover trying to kind of defend her honor in a way. Like he's a little bit off, and he has a conversation with Mona where he's like, I can forgive you, but I can't forgive him. And I think that the theme of forgiveness is interesting because not being an apologist for what they did at all. These 40s movies, obviously, they can't show everything. They weren't explicit, things like that. But genuinely, I don't know what your guys' read of the movie was. My read was that their relationship was not all that developed. There was obviously like the relational intimacy, and they kissed the one time, but I did not read that as they were always getting together, kissing. Like, I don't really necessarily know if I think that the film presents them as having like sexually consummated their affair even. What was your guys' read?
I think it's pretty clear because, there's a scene where he leaves his briefcase at her apartment, and she returns. She's like, you left this. And also, as Eddie Muller points out, like the scene, the sort of morning after scene, you don't see him. There's no evidence of him there. But she gets out of her bedroom, and she's been styled to look like she had a pleasant night of intercourse. It is very subtle.
It is. Then it was very subtle. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you that it doesn't feel like it's gone on for a long time. My opinion, my read is that they had one night together, and then she instantly.
They're going at it like bunny rabbits.
In lust, yeah.
Still not good, but it wasn't deep. It's not like these. It's, again, one of my favorites, if not my favorite. It's not the best, but just my personal favorite. Postman Always Rings Twice was one of the first ones I read. So in my mind, like, I can't help but have that sometimes be like my meter for how I rate them. Like those two are like madly and deeply in love, quote unquote. Yeah, they are in lust. They are burning in lust. These two people kind of have a flirtation and an attraction, but then like it's not developed. So, okay, let's say they had one night together. Obviously a violation. But then like when it is explained to both of the partners, it's so interesting. But anyway, so the progression of events. So Smiley gets all amped up, goes over to John's house to confront him and like to kill him. Like John's intention, or Smiley's intentions rather, he wants to do something, and maybe he wants to kill him. I don't know. But then right away, Mona calls to warn him. And again, very noir, but also very real. She's like, I don't want this to happen. She's very kind of straight ahead going, obviously it wasn't good. I'm sorry. Let's get on track. Let's get out of town. Like, obviously things are weird here. Mac's definitely not leaving me alone. So for anything else, we need to get off of this guy's radar. But let's just leave. Like, we are together. I want to be with you. Let's build a life. Let's leave the crime, leave all this complicated situation. Let's just leave. And he goes, okay, sounds good. After I go, maybe kill this guy. Like, she doesn't want him to go to jail, and she is begging him. So she calls John to hopefully diffuse the situation. And I mean, I was surprised again because John, being this kind of milquetoast insurance midlife crisis guy, he goes to his dresser and pulls out like a legit gun, not just like some 6-shooter, like a legit, like, this is my gun. Like he knew how to use it. And it kind of goes to a place where it can't go back. and you see Mac just sitting in the car, like very excited. Mac can't wait for somebody to die because both of these guys are in his kind of narcissistic, like kind of crazy brain. He's like, both of these guys are in my way. Like in Mac's perfect world, like they cartoonishly shoot each other simultaneously and they're both gone. But for him, it's like one of these guys is going to shoot the other guy and then maybe they'll be in jail or something. And then he goes to give Mona the bad news of, oh man, Smiley went over to John's and John shot him. So John's going to be arrested and Smiley's gone. So pack your bags, hon. Like, let's go.
But I love it even more that it's the police radio, that he comes over and turns on that police radio and then they report the address.
He plays it for her on her radio. And I was like, is the police frequency like any homeowner with a radio? That did rub up against me. I was like, any homeowner with a radio can hear what the police are saying at any time.
Yeah, that was odd. That was odd. Well, it was odd too when John is just about to confess the affair to his wife, and then his son cries out. His son is having a nightmare, and his son is like, oh, there was somebody here or something. And I was just like, oh, I was thinking, oh, well, Smiley's outside, or it's Mac outside the window, because you can just imagine Mac like some sort of looming creature outside. Yeah, because he walks over to that window and I'm just like, hey, close that window, man. Like,
no, yeah, I thought that was going to be Mac. I thought that was going to get dark for a second there.
Because he's up on the second floor, though, too. And I'm just like, oh, if you saw a creature outside the second floor. But no, instead he just blames the comic books,
Those darn comics.
No more of those Busby Boy adventures.
Yeah, I love that. The Busby Boys. Little subtle callback to Busby Berkeley. All those films he made. Just to go back to the noir aspect of it and the exaggerated aspects of it, it really is just Mac, the Raymond Burr character, who makes this a film noir story. This could very easily have been a 40s melodrama about a guy, an insurance agent who, cheats on his wife one time. And there might even be a character like Mac in a melodrama version of this. And, it complicates situation for him and this woman and him and his wife. And it's a little bit of a love triangle. But because the Raymond Burr character is so exaggerated, such a menacing brute, and manipulates all these people to such a degree, and, somehow is able to tune in police radio on a normal frequency, and all these things, that's what makes it into a noir. And then the other characters, especially Lizabeth Scott's character, fit into noir patterns, and they fit into these tropes, but it could easily be a melodrama. There's so many great melodramas from that same era that feature some of these same actors. There's a great Joan Crawford movie called Daisy Kenyon, which is a not that dissimilar, film in the sense of it's a love triangle, two men and one woman in that case. But, you can feel how this movie could work out and how this story could play out in different ways. If you read the book, it's much more pulpy, much more sexy, much more, of a noir story. And that's, again, I think another thing that makes this movie a bit of a outlier, and one of the things that makes it so interesting.
His malevolent, oblivious focus kind of necessitates the only way for him to not ruin Mona's life and take her is for him to be dead. And and Mona knows that. She's like, okay. And she says in the very first scene that we see her, hey, I've also got a gun. And I mean, it's seated. And it also would make sense that a woman who ostensibly has experienced the things that this character has experienced would have a gun, and she takes care of herself. The movie that happens after this for Mona, it's unfortunate with his background being a cop, but also if they know he's bad, I was like, is she going to actually go to jail? She's got a lot of eyewitnesses who can say, yeah, this guy is really harassing her all the time in several public places. So I was like, is she going to actually go to jail? But whether she does or she doesn't, killing a man in your home is not something that you easily walk past either. They both, and I didn't realize that until my second viewing, I was like, oh, that's also really great subtle storytelling. They both had to deal with killing somebody basically in their home and kind of how similarly and dissimilarly things in the story that we're given work out for them.
Oh, yeah. He says we've got the wrong person up there. But, he's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. He's going to get away with murder, literally.
Yeah, Raymond Burr probably wasn't packing a gun when he went over there. So I still think she could get off on a stand your ground kind of thing, especially because it seems like the cop really does not want to put her in jail. Yeah, the wrong person's up there. It should be you, guy. Yeah.
Well, he had a guy coming. He had a drunk man with a gun and a grudge coming into his house. Like, that makes sense. But that conversation with, I don't know, the lieutenant or prosecutor or whatever, where John bears his soul, and he's like, yeah, you're guilty, but you're going to go free. And that's characters in noir. They're often seeking redemption or a life raft to know. They usually don't find what they're looking for. But he gets it. He gets it legally. And then at the very end, he gets it relationally. And there is almost hope. You're like, his wife is like, things are never going to be the same, but I thought about leaving you, but we're married. We have a son. We have a life. I care about our life, and I would like to build it back if we can. And you're like, I don't know if I've ever seen that in a noir.
And he even says, like, are you sure you don't want a divorce? And it's just like shocking to hear that term.
I'm sure that was stunning in 1948, where the male character who done this is like, you want a divorce? Like, that's what I deserve. Like in the precinct, he's like, I deserve to be in jail. You're not going to get jail. And on the ride home, I deserve for you to take the kid in the house and leave me. You're not going to get that either. And he's like, okay, what all the noir characters and all the other movies want, he's getting, but it also doesn't feel like a success either, which, because of all the moral compromises, like, this is just a genius story in that way.
You've got me thinking like I'm Mona Stevens' defense attorney here, because, okay, she's established precedent. If we recall, when he was threatening her, when Raymond Burr was threatening her, she said she had to like ask the floor walkers where she works to drive her home and make sure she got home okay. So not only were there witnesses at that one time that he came and watched, but she told all these people that she works with that this big threatening guy is like, creeping her out and showing up at her house. And they've even had to like drive her home, and they can testify. So they're going to get her off.
He went to the station to sign out Smiley, and then somehow,
but those guys are his buddies. Like they might cover for him, but like,
it's a fascinating story. Like, the more I think about it, I'm like, thank you, Mike, for having me on for this one. This is a gem.
Yeah. It was great to finally catch up to this movie. And like Eddie Muller says, like, this was a bit of a lost movie because it was an independent production. And very often those movies become orphans because nobody knows who owns them after 20 years. They get bought and sold and repackaged a million times. So there weren't a lot of, that's why I never saw this movie at the Brattle or the Harvard Film Archive or any of these other theaters that I used to go to constantly to watch these movies, but there weren't prints of this circulating around to see. So it's great that they've restored this, UCLA and the Film Noir Foundation.
Thank you, UCLA and Kino. This was great.
All right, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, Gray. Nice day.
Evans reports a fog rolling in.
Have the stable saddle up Blackie. I'll want him after breakfast. Well, tell the chief I'll go over the personnel reports with him at 1400.
Aye, sir.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, sir.
Eve, can we get married?
Sure. Didn't I say yes a long time ago?
No, I mean right now. Tonight.
All right, Scott. Anytime. I'll always love you, so I guess it doesn't matter how soon we begin together.
Be all right if I pick you up at 8 o'clock tonight?
Yes.
And I think you better wear a dress just this once.
Ashamed of me already, huh?
Sure, but I love you. Chaplin doesn't, though, and I think he might like a dress.
You're not going right away.
I have to relieve Chief Warnicki.
Hello, Mary.
What's this about my husband?
I'm on my way to relieve him for chow.
Oh, don't be in a rush. It'll do him good to miss a meal. Honestly, I'll be glad when he's discharged just so I can thin him down a little bit.
We're going to be married.
Well, I should think you would be.
I mean tonight.
The sooner the better.
What is this, a conspiracy?
I tell you what I'll do. I'll wash your hair for you this afternoon. I bought some new fancy shampoo stuff.
That's right, we'll be back next week with a Renoir Noir, Woman on the Beach. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Ian and Philip. So, Philip, what's the latest with you, sir?
Still running the Substance. I have lost my editor, so I'm trying to get on a more regular release schedule, but you can find me over at the Substance Podcast with regular substantive cinema episodes coming out. I got some great ones in the can. If you're listening to this in Noirvember, you will hopefully, if I get the episode all done, be able to hear our pal Mike White and semi-regular guest here, Spencer Parsons, talk about Sam Fuller's Shot Corridor. Got some other fun stuff coming up as well, but you can find me at The Substance Pod on the socials or The Substance, wherever you get your podcasts.
And Ian, how about yourself?
You can read my reviews and thoughts about film on my blog, film5000.com, and on Letterboxd at Ian Anthony Brownell. And you can listen to me regularly on the Brattle Film Podcast. Film noir fans might enjoy the big episode we did last September, a retrospective of Lauren Bacall on what would have been her 100th birthday.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting my mouth off, please check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Pitfall! What am I gonna do? I'm caught in a pitfall of a love that isn't true. The first time that I met you, you let me hold your hand. You led me on and made me think that I could be your man. The way you cuddled close to me and held your lips so near. You made my lonely heart give in. I lost all sudden fear. Then I fell. Pitfall. What am I gonna do? I'm caught in a pitfall of a love that isn't true. Whispered in my ear. My head was spinning round and round, my brain just wasn't clear. You told me that you loved me and forever you'd be true. And with your lips pressed close to mine, oh, what else could I do? Then I fell. Pitfall. What am I